Hey VC, good to be here. We are on week, I don't know, a lot of the stay-at-home order. So I've been trying to fill my time with as many things as possible that aren't entirely focused on that. One of the things that I have been doing is sort of following threads in music. By that I mean, looking at bands and thinking about like what the other members did. And I know that there's been a lot of threads in the VC about things like this, where you look at one band and you follow who did what and where they went. This is a little bit different, though. I went to college in Maryland, in Baltimore, in the late 80s and early 90s. I went to Maryland Institute College of Art. I was a painter, and it was a great time. It was, it's a great city, lots of great music happening then. I happened to live in a warehouse building with a good friend who was an architect and a musician, and he wanted to have a recording studio. So we kind of built a recording studio inside of the warehouse that we lived in. It was an old hat factory. And my bed actually was kind of on top of the recording studio itself, which we kind of built as a standalone or freestanding room kind of inside of this big hat factory that had, 15, 16 foot ceilings, and it was big. And it was a really cool place, and Tony, my roommate, played a lot of amazing music, and it's just a great time. So a friend of mine at school, his name was Jason, and we used to hang out and talk about, we started by talking a lot about hip hop, because there weren't that many people at that school who were that interested in hip hop, but he and I were, and so we hit it off talking about that stuff. And then we just started making mixtapes for each other. Excuse me. And he would make these sort of beautifully crafted mixtapes with great covers that was artwork that he would create, and I would do the same for him. After I left Baltimore, Jason's mixtapes were some of my favorite sort of little treasures from that time, because they were just collections of great music. He turned me on to a lot of interesting things that I wasn't listening to at the time. And then, after I left Baltimore, I just never stayed in touch with him. And he's probably the one person from college that I was like that always nagged at me that I should have kept in contact with, because I think of everybody that I knew, he was probably the most genuine, the most kind of open, just a really, really good person. And I always felt a little sad that I didn't like kind of try and keep in touch and stay connected. So I don't know, about 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, maybe a little bit more, I thought I'd look him up on Facebook. And then I found out that he had passed away in 2012, and that was very sad. And so I never got a chance to talk to him again. He had a band, and that band was called Rodan. His name's Jason Noble. I had never heard Rodan play when I was back there. I left Baltimore in 1992, and so I don't think that they were actually playing shows by then. and I only knew about the band through other friends, and so I knew the name, and when the record came out, I got it and thought it was a great record. I listened to it a lot in the mid-90s, and it was just sort of wrapped up in the Baltimore scene with me. It felt like music that was coming out of that time. And I loved that, along with some other bands that were happening in Baltimore at the time. Jason was actually from Louisville, Kentucky, and so he went to school in Baltimore, but everybody seems to know him through the Louisville scene. And I think the rest of Rodan was also hailed from Louisville, if I understand right. But I didn't know anybody else in the band, and I didn't know anything really about the band. And they made one record, and they broke up. And so that was the extent of what I knew about Rodan. Many years later, it turned out that Tony, my roommate, who had a recording studio, recorded their first record, I guess really as a demo, and so that this is, I'll go in pieces. This is Rusty. This is the first record from Rodan. And let me open this up a little bit. So this is 1994. It's come to be known, this was news to me. So I have since discovered that Rodan and Jason, excuse me, this is the insert for Rusty, were really famous. I didn't know that until quite recently, because they were this thing to me that where they kind of fit in a little box in my head, and I just never really followed up on anything about them over the years. I just knew that they made one record, and that was the extent of what I knew. It turns out that record is pretty famous in the sort of birth of, post-hardcore, post-rock scene. Apparently pretty influential. There were a lot of spin-off bands from that, and I'll get to those. But back to the subject of Tony recording this record. This record actually came out last year, 2019. This is Rodan Hat Factory 93. So this came out last year, 2019, and it's the first session that, as I understand it, that was recorded of most of the material for Rusty, Rodan's first record, on a kind of translucent gold vinyl. So if you haven't heard Rodan, their music is beautiful. It's, as you'd expect from sort of post-hardcore, post-rock, it's melodic, it's full of distortion and crescendos, it builds, it's music that's kind of almost symphonic in its approach to rock or to punk or just music. It's really amazing, beautiful music with a lot of noise and layers. If you haven't heard it, if you haven't heard Rusty, you should definitely check it out. If you have heard Rusty, I think this record, if it's still available, is really amazing to listen to, because you hear sort of the first go-round of their approach to the music. And this was recorded at the Hat Factory, which is the place that I lived, I guess, as I understand it, unless it was just after that. I'm not sure if it was just after that or if it was still in the Hat Factory. Definitely a band worth checking out. Now, here's where things get interesting for me, because I was mentioning at the beginning that I've been kind of following threads in music and seeing, okay, who did what and what happened to the other members of a band. And so for me, the only thing I knew about Jason was that he was in this band called Rodan. They made this record, and I listened to it in the 90s, and I hadn't listened to it a lot since, but I thought about it when I was replacing records, and it was definitely a record that I really wanted to replace, so I did. And then recently, during this lockdown, I started looking up who was doing what. And one of the things I found out was that Jason had been in other bands, and I didn't know that. One of the bands he was in was called Shipping News. And Shipping News was a band that I had listened to quite a lot in the early 2000s, late 90s, maybe early 2000s, somewhere around there, and really enjoyed it. And that is this band. So this is their first record, I believe, Save Everything, from 1997. This is just on black vinyl. And it has a lot of the same kind of approach to music as Rodan, I would say. So there's a lot of the DNA is the same. This is a booklet insert. Really nice photography, nice work. I don't know if this is Jason's. I would imagine that this is Jason's artwork, but I'm not sure. I should probably have checked that. It feels very much like Jason's artwork. But I didn't know that this was Jason's band, that he was in this band. And so it was a surprise to me to find out that I'd been listening to another band and really enjoying them. I'd been wondering whatever happened to Jason, and it turns out I had been listening to him unknowingly. That's Shipping News, and this is their second, maybe, record. Flies the Fields from 2005. I think I'm missing, this might be their third record. I think I'm missing their second record. Insert. And so that was this kind of nice and it was sort of a bittersweet surprise that that I had known another band that a friend had been, instrumental in as a guitarist and singer, but I didn't know it at the time. So that was, I wish I had known it. And then when this all first started happening, I started looking around at what else that the members were connected to. Turns out that Jason was also a member of a band called Rachel's. And Rachel's was someone that I did not know at all. So that was new to me entirely. And Rachel's is a sort of, it's sort of a mixture of, well, it's sort of a classical presentation of music, but constructed through the same sort of It has the same DNA as Rodan and Shipping News. It feels like making post-rock with classical instruments. I don't know how else to say that, but just beautiful music, absolutely beautiful music. Viola, cello, drums, violin, piano, hand drums, double bass. It's just sort of a small orchestra, just beautiful music, but not precious like a lot of traditional classical would be. So this is Handwriting, the first record, and it's in one of these, fold-out sleeves. And there's a small insert in here, a couple small inserts. There's a small booklet with some, beautiful artwork. And there's a little card with information on it. And then the record itself. Black vinyl. Really nice presentation. I mean, it's, these folded sleeves are not great for sort of keeping things safe. So they're not the most stable platform, but they do look really nice. Anyway, so that was all completely new to me. Rachel's was, and I just absolutely fell in love with them, and ended up grabbing quite a few of their records. So the next Rachel's record I have, this one actually is interesting to me because I remember a long talk that Jason and I had sitting on the steps of the main building at school. We were talking about Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele. And I don't remember why we were talking about it. I think there was an opera that had just come to the to Baltimore, and I had gone to see it, which was really unusual for me. I think it's the only opera I've ever been to in my life, and I'm sure I went to impress a girl. And it was, I'm trying to remember what it was, but I think it was Wagner, and the sets were designed around sort of the turn of the century Austrian art scene. So it was very much Klimt. And I think that we were talking about that. And so we got on the subject of Klimt and Egon Schiele, the painters. And it turns out that the second record from Rachel's is music for Egon Schiele, which isn't surprising because we both really loved Schiele. And it was just this sort of interesting thing to see that sort of come out in the music as well. Insert. Little booklet. With Egon Schiele drawings. I think the presentation on these is really beautiful. Again, black vinyl. So again, a bittersweet find that there were these records, this stack of them. I think I have 5 Rachel's records. This is the third record, The Sea and the Bells. this is 1996. The first two, I think, are 95, 94, 95, and 96. So Sea and the Bells, which is actually a double LP. And I don't think, oh yeah, there's a small booklet in here. This is an easy way to ship a double LP because you don't have to do anything to the sleeve. But again, nice little booklet. Yeah. And I've just recently picked some of these up, so I haven't even listened to all of them. I've listened to the first three and just absolutely love them, but I haven't listened to Selenography. Maybe that's pronounced wrong. Which is another double LP. Inner sleeves. So I don't know these yet, but if they're anything like the first three, I'm sure I will really enjoy them. And these are also black vinyl. And I will try and get through the rest of this quickly. And then the last record that I have from them is Systems Layers, which I think was the last record they put out in 2003. And that's another double LP. And there, that's Jason there. He was a good guy. And, you know, we weren't like super tight or anything. We just would hang out and chat and talk about music and trade mixtapes. And so I knew him in one way, and then for me, what's kind of amazing is to discover this whole other world that he was involved in. There's another, I don't know, stack of bands that came out of Rodan. June of '44 came out of Rodan. God, I can't remember all the other bands, but June of '44 was another band that I listened to in, I guess, the 90s, early 2000s, it must have been the 90s. And I had no idea that that was connected to him somehow, or to Rodan, to be specific. So in this particular case, sort of following a thread was really an amazing experience for me because it was related to a time and a person that I knew, but it kind of made me think about just pulling threads on a lot of other bands that I haven't had the opportunity to do that with, and I think that's what I'll be spending some time doing while we're all shut in. Hope you're all safe and well. And thanks for watching.